Llisa for joining and sharing this. I should also mention Llisa is the Chief Curator. Is that your title for the Eames Institute?
Yes, it is.
Is that
Yes, it
correct?
is.
And she is also the granddaughter of Ray and Charles Eames. So in addition to being a curator, she's been connected since birth, right? So so
Been very wonderful.
yes, exactly, exactly. So I see a lot of hi Lisa. So I think there are a number of people who have met
Hi,
you or know
everyone.
you. So what we're going to do is I'll ask Lisa to share this presentation with all of you, and we will plan some time at the end for Q&A for Lisa. And if you just
Mhm.
put your Q&A in the chat, we'll ask you to do that, and then I will, Lisa, keep an eye on chat and sort of, give you the question so you don't have to worry about
Right.
watching the chat. So without
And
further ado, Llisa
shall I turn off
Demetrios.
my camera so they can just focus on the screen?
Yeah, up to you, however you would like to do it. I like seeing you. You have a perfectly curated Eames background. I'm going to turn off my camera until we do the
Okay.
Q&A, and then I'll come back on
Okay.
camera. How does that sound?
Okay, great.
All
Perfect.
right, Lisa, over to you.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. It's great you're all coming to this presentation that I'm sharing today. I am the youngest of the 5 grandchildren of Ray and Charles Eames. Some of you have met my siblings possibly, Carla, Byron, Lucia, and Eames. I have always loved the archival material that came from the Eames office. As you'll hear today, I love what I call catch and release. I like to look at the objects, but also think of ways to share the objects digitally and physically, and often how one object can tell multiple stories. Like a train can be a gift from Billy Wilder, it could be used in a film, on a house of cards, in a Homer Miller showroom, and in their first Christmas at Eames office. So a toy can be really an example of that preludes to serious ideas. Now today, I am the Chief Curator of the Eames Institute of Infinite Curiosity. The overarching goal of the Eames Institute is to unpack the way Ray and Charles worked, the way they infuse their designs and lives with curiosity and discovery at every turn. And this is at the Eames Ranch, which is the home of the Eames Institute. Here are Ray and Charles. What we want to do here at the Institute is we aspire to be a home for curious problem solvers online and on land. Ray coming from painting and Charles coming from architecture, they always let the designs evolve from their learning. They were always learning. And as a colleague said, they were a 21st century couple in the 20th century. Here is the Eames Ranch, which houses the Eames Institute, as I said. When the Eames Institute was first formed about 4 years ago, the buildings here look much the same, but now they are completely recladded with hardy board, and also all the windows were replaced to safeguard the collection inside the buildings. Here's the courtyard to the gallery, which is always a beautiful view with the paths that my mom designed when she first moved up here. My mother, Llisa Eames, built Eames Ranch as a place to live, work, and preserve the remarkable body of work left by her parents that she had inherited. She was also inspired by her surroundings. She wanted to enclose the courtyard, which was always green, with 2 gates. She designed this gate on the left for the entrance to reflect the tall grasses during the early summer. And on the right, she was always making weavings from the branches that she found, or little twigs when she would take walks on her property. Here's a beautiful gate that she designed, which she called Iterations on Solar Panels. This view faces east to see the sun and the moon rising. Today, we still have this display in her living room. My mother never wanted to have a fireplace because we lived in California, which has droughts and fire seasons. So she considered that this beautiful display brought warmth to her living room. There is something special about having the collection in the home at the ranch. Is a way to immerse someone in more than just the furniture. Someone new to the designs of Ray and Charles might enter and recognize a chair, and then learn that the graphics about the architecture of films, exhibit pieces are also by them. This is a bubble wand, which is from the Mathematica display that Ray and Charles designed, one of the exhibit parts. What I love is that Ray and Charles would say not just what would Mies van der Rohe say, what would Bucky say, but also what would nature say. They were interested in constants in nature like gravity, but also this one demonstrates surface tension. Every time you dip this bubble wand, it will do that. Here at the ranch, we're just beginning and embarking on a 2-year renovation. My mother, when she first built the house, worked with William Turnbull. My mom wanted to collect water from the roofs, have compost toilets, install solar panels, but it just wasn't the right time. The county wasn't ready for her. Today, what I call what we're about to do, not a 2.0 version, but a 4.0 version. And the good thing is over the last couple of years, we've collected data. So when we come back after the renovation, we're going to be able to show how we're able to do more with less water. This is a view down to the barn from the house. The barn is going to remain much the same at this point. And this was a place where my mom and I also produced our own works, archived material, and hosted gatherings. In this space here, we're hoping to have workshops where we can share about the fleeces from the sheep, and also do sort of a class where you could show the dyes that we could grow on the property to be able to, after the shearing of the sheep. Growing up, my mother spent her teenage years and summers in Los Angeles, taking photography lessons from Charles and painting from Ray, and she even learned how to drive in LA. I like to say that as great as my grandparents were as designers, they were even more amazing as grandparents. They never talked down to us. So I'm often asked, what is my earliest memory of spending time with Ray and Charles? And it's going out to dinner with them. And where the office was in Venice, California, there were many cafes and restaurants by the beach, and we'd gone to have dinner in one of them. And as we're walking back, Charles asked me what I thought of dinner. And I said, it was borscht. I said, I didn't like it very much. And he said, how would you have done things differently? And in that moment, I felt empowered, I felt heard, but at the same time, it made me look at things differently. He asked me if I knew what was in borscht, which of course I didn't. He said, well, there's beets and potatoes and onions. You know, you could have made mashed potatoes. You could have put the beets on the side. And then he asked me, why do you think the chef made borscht? Is that maybe all that was at the farmer's market, or perhaps that's a favorite dish? And so we had a whole story as we walked back to the office, which is a few blocks away. I told this story to some docents from the Oakland Museum when they were hosting the exhibit in 2018 at the Oakland Museum of California. And the next time I went to see the exhibit, one of the docents came over to me and said to me, Llisa, your story worked. I said, what story? I said, which one? And she said, the borscht story. The next time my grandchildren complained about the salads, I said, how would you do it differently? And they said that they didn't like the mushrooms. She said, I don't mind if they don't have the mushrooms. But she said, now we're all making the salad together. We're talking through it, and everyone's happy. And this is what I feel is the gift of the Eames Institute, is sharing the legacy of Ray and Charles through the collection of the material, lessons that we can learn and apply today. This is a tabletop with some of the drawings and letters that I got from my grandparents growing up. They were always so encouraging. Whenever we would visit as grandchildren, we would get to watch whatever movies they had just made. They shared what exhibits they were working on. It was really wonderful. I thought everyone's grandparents made 3-screen slideshows and films like Powers of 10. That's with my mom and with Charles. They put us in their films. This is a film called Llisa Draws a Letter from 1978. And Charles and Ray had just received a Polavision camera from Edward Land, and they were testing it out. And so they filmed me in the living room of the Eames house. And then the next time I came down to Los Angeles, Ray opened up a cabinet where there was a projector, and Charles pulled down the screen, and we got to screen the film in the very living room where they had filmed me. And it was just so special, it was so magical. And also what I realized later was that it was my first home theater. We don't do art, we solve problems, said Charles. Then he added, how do we get from where we are to where we want to be? And I think that there's always something very important about this, that Ray and Charles trusted their design process to solving problems. And also, what I have found working with the collection is there's often messages within messages. And what I mean by that is there's an amazing machine they called the Solar Do Nothing machine, which was because Alcoa had asked some designers and architects what could be made with aluminum. And Ray and Charles made this beautiful machine that does absolutely nothing fabulously. But in the short film about it, what you see is after you see it spinning and twirling, it pans down to a solar panel. And what you realize is that actually it's being run by solar energy. And that's a way that Ray and Charles are sharing the idea. They're opening up this door to the idea that there are alternatives to fossil fuels. This is the exhibit, The World of Ray and Charles Eames, that I was talking about that was at the Oakland Museum. It had started at the Barbican in 2015 and continued to tour to about 6 countries. About 400 objects were borrowed from the family. And it was just really exciting to see it travel and how it's still, the work continued to resonate with the audience today. And people really missed it when it closed at, after it closed at Oakland Museum. In the Bay Area, people were wondering, where could there be a place to keep learning from this material? And that's what the idea really became about, taking this collection and finding ways to share the archival material, how Ray and Charles iterated on an idea, how they prototyped it, the materials that they used. Here's a view from the gallery at the Eames Ranch. The collection from 901 was a working collection for Ray and Charles, and it is even today. We have chairs in the collection that are actually, the fabric might be torn or the base might be broken, but Ray and Charles had kept it because they knew where to make it better and stronger the next time. That's one of the reasons that Ray and Charles selected working with Herman Miller, because Herman Miller was willing to continue to iterate on the production of the furniture, keep improving on it and making it with more sustainable materials as they produced it. And that continues today with Herman Miller and Vitra. And the Eames family feels very fortunate to have partners in this way of continuing this legacy of Ray and Charles's thinking. As Ray and Charles would say, it's goodness all the way down. From the designer, from the company, to the individuals producing the furniture, it's goodness all the way down. In this image, there are chairs with you can see with a cloth edge, there's a few of them. We have this as an example where the upholstery would often, that's where it would get worn out first, and someone would throw away the upholstery. So that's why Ray and Charles then did the rubberized edge, because then it would last longer. There's a favorite story that I'd love to tell about the airport tandem seating. And again, what I want to do as chief curator at the Institute is it's not just showing the object, but telling the stories and the conversations that Ray and Charles had around the object of how they problem solved. For this design tandem, when they designed the tandem seating and were asked to design airport furniture, they didn't just go design a chair. What they did is they said, you talk to the person who's going to buy your chair, but also the person who's going to take care of your chair. So in talking to maintenance teams, they said, what were the problems? And the main problem seemed to be the replacement part. Maintenance teams said they were 2 different shapes, they were heavily upholstered, they took up a lot of storage space, and often took 2 people to pop out the old one and put in the new one. So I hope you look at the tandem seating again. The back and the seat are the same shape. It rolls up into a little tube. It just takes 1 person to pop out the old one and then put in the new one. The concept of appropriateness, this how it should be-ness, has equal value in the circus, in the making of a work of art, and in science. When Ray and Charles, there you can see the tandem seating there on the left, where you can see the back and the seat are the same shape. Another example that I like to share is about the compact sofas, that when Ray and Charles were designing sofas, they were asking what was wrong with the existing ones. And it turned out there was a problem in the shipping of sofas, that often they would arrive broken. So that's where I know there's other places and companies that think they designed it first, but Ray and Charles really came up with the idea of the flat pack to be able to ship the furniture safely and take care of that problem. I always look at what Ray and Charles did as examples of mending systems as opposed to replacing them. It's sort of like seeing what had evolved and see if it can be improved upon, and only innovate as the last resort, as Charles used to say. In the collection, we have not just what Ray and Charles made, but also what they collected from around the world. Some of them were gifts, some of them they bought. These are beautiful kites that they collected and received. There are some from India, China, and Japan in this particular grouping. One thing that they loved about examples like kites and tops is that they're so well designed you forget they were ever designed. And it's also something passed from one generation to the next. When the Eames Institute started to care for the collection, which is about a couple of years ago, 2019, one of the first things we did at the request of my family was to conserve the Ray paintings and also a Charles painting. And this is just to give you an example of the before treatment and then the after treatment. What I find most interesting also is how beautiful it is to see after the restoration of the piece is also the conservator's report, which carefully details everything that was done, which is very important later so that if something needs to be taken care of later, they can always refer back to these notes. Now, on visits to the Eames office when I was a young grandchild, a young girl visiting, I thought the graphics room was the most magical place because these beautiful drawers would have colorful paper. They would have the tools that Ray and Charles used to make things. And so I really thought rainbows came out of these drawers. And I think you can see why from this particular image. And that's something that we still continue to do with the collection is open the drawers. We're still unboxing material. We're still finding things. That's sort of how it's also shaping some of the exhibits that we're doing online at eamesinstitute.org is we are sharing what we're finding and seeing examples of the prototyping, the scale models. There could be graphics. It's been very exciting to watch that evolve. What's also fun to see in the drawer here is you can see examples like in this upper right-hand corner, those are actually Crayon X crayons, which then Ray and Charles also use in their coloring toy. So you can see how different objects they're testing out perhaps before they use it in their own products. I've always loved this quote. The most important thing is that you love what you're doing, and the second that you're not afraid of where your next idea will lead. In the collection, these are two examples of beautiful birthday letters that Ray wrote to Charles. I love the little R's and the hearts at the bottom. And I'm not sure if you can quite read the one in the middle. In the middle, it says between 1953 and the birthday child. This says, "Who can do no wrong to the birthday child goes all love and honors and hugs and kisses, Ray." So for me, it's really exciting to have grown up with the collection and grown up with Ray and Charles, as extraordinary as they were, but also to look at the pieces as objects to share as a curator today. Here are some of Ray's beautiful fashion drawings. Her father managed a theater where she grew up in Sacramento, where she saw dancers and performers and singers. And I just wonder at how it infused her imagination with ideas. And these are just some of the many beautiful fashion drawings that we have in the collection. Her paper dolls as a young girl are extraordinary that she made just as a teenager and as a young child. And then this is Charles's from his early years. On the left, when he was married to my grandmother, Catherine, and when my mom was a little girl, a view of St. Louis. And actually there's some amazing biographical information, the places he worked, where they lived. To see it in a geographical context is wonderful. And then on the right is a sketch that he did on the honeymoon in 1929 with Catherine. He would sketch in every stop for 10 to 15 minutes, and it's a wonderful record of the journey that they had. Also, I would add that people often ask what Ray and Charles were like before they were married. And so to have some of this early material of Charles is really special from both Ray and Charles from their early years. Now, here's a beautiful selection of sheets of paper. This is representing about 8 countries here. Ray and Charles would use this in exhibits as edging around a picture. They might use it in a scale model. And here's an example of how they use some of this paper in the Rebelle Toy House, which I wish had gone into production. This marvelous toy house, you could actually separate and stack it into 4 layers. You could spread it like this. And this is how we displayed it in the exhibit when it was on tour. And then here it is again for the bedding. Now, this is what it's like to be an archivist and curator of the collection, is you can open a box and there can be a picture of an octopus leg, something from the graphics room, a postcard, a traveler's check, a business card. And so there's just, because material was brought up from Los Angeles, it was just a chance to be able to, it was a chance, everything had to be brought up quickly from Los Angeles. And so not everything was labeled. And so we're still unboxing material that did not get labeled, and we're organizing it maybe by exhibit or by a special project. What's extraordinary about Ray and Charles's work to me is that, you know, they could be working on an exhibit, making a short film, hosting grandchildren, writing a proposal, all at the same time. What I'm excited about for the Institute is to also share some of the, maybe some people don't know as much about the National Aquarium proposal. And we have archival material that shows the research that they did for that. Watch faces, which perhaps they might have used for the Franklin and Jefferson show. You can see how they used Japanese fish on a string for one of the House of Cards. Here's some of the correspondence. And I think that's also what makes our collection a little different, is we have some of the personal letters that they wrote, the rebuses, passports, even a driver's license, as well as some of the material that goes into the exhibits. Here's a picture of my mom shooting archery at the Eames house while Ray and Charles were waiting for the parts. It only took 6 weeks to build the house, but it took 3.5 years to receive the parts. This is probably one of my favorite drawers. It's the Scale People drawer. This is Adobe Photoshop before Adobe Photoshop had been invented, where Ray and Charles had scale people. I apologize if you hear noise in the background. We have begun the renovation here, and there's some trucks here just coming in. But you can see how they use the scale model in the picture on the right. Now, what's interesting is that often people thought that the scale model was the actual finished piece from the photographs. People thought that the installation or the exhibition was already installed. And instead, Ray and Charles were just using this simply as a tool to be able to share for the installation teams, for the PR teams, for the exhibits of what it was going to look like. But again, it was interesting how something could be used multiple ways. This is here in the gallery at the Eames Ranch. Some of the chairs, also the musical tower, which is just a wonderful piece, which I'm looking forward to when we reinstall it in where we're moving all the material now for the next 2 years to reinstall it. The musical tower is something that Ray and Charles designed for the Time Life Executive Suites, and it would play a piece of music. And what they were showing was the constant of gravity, and that a marble always dropped, but why can't it play a piece of music? And then it was a bit distracting. So the original musical towers were sent to back to the Eames office after a few weeks of being at the Time Life Executive Suites, where they were enjoyed by staff and by guests. When you worked at the office, you often changed the piece of music. And so as grandchildren, we loved running in to go hear whatever the new piece of music was on the musical tower. And then on the right is an example of the tabletops that I do, where I love to gather the material to allow people to make their own connections, like the leg splint there with the children's furniture, both made of molded plywood, or some of the graphics. And people really love to pore over the tables when we do them. Here's some of the shopping bags, some of the graphics, the titles on the drawers. I love this. Do not use these papers without asking Ray. Thank you. So there's not one of something in the collection. There's usually tens or hundreds of examples. And these particular toys, some of them were used on House of Cards, were used in their short films. So again, what I love is an object isn't used just once, it's used multiple times. We wanted to make the best for the most for the least. Now, to do that, I think what's special here is when you have a chair, or we have basically design with what I call a capital D, the finished pieces, but we also have design with a lowercase d, the process of how Ray and Charles solved the problems. And this is an example with the Eames Aluminum Group. These are the spreaders that were carved for the Eames Aluminum Group, because then that gets then cast into aluminum. Actually, I'm going to go back to this picture for a moment, because when they were carving these particular pieces, the reason I picked this photograph is you can see a little bit of a slice on some of them, and that's where Ray and Charles would have it cut and then modify the end. They were trying to figure out what was the best way to make that connection to keep the tautness of the material. Now, there's also a wonderful story about this, that over 8 of these antlers and spreaders and base antlers were carved, that they ended up, Ray and Charles, picking the very first one. And at first, everyone was a little surprised. They're like, but we have 7 more. And Ray and Charles said, it took the carving of the other 7 to know that the first one was right. And I think that's often so true, that sometimes it is the very first thing, but you do have to do the exploration to make sure that is the correct choice. Whether it's a house or a film or a chair, it must have a structural concept. And so for this, these are for some of the compact sofa studies. This is actually in steel, aluminum. They're painted, they're uncoated, just seeing what the material could really do. This is what I call the exploration of the honest use of materials. This is the prototype room. And what's amazing is this is a very small portion of the collection that we have here at the branch. This is only 5% of the collection. We have it stored in about 4 or 5 other locations, from Los Angeles to Concord to Oakland, and we're pulling it all together to one spot. So we're going to be able to have it all together, which is going to be really exciting, because it's going to facilitate the inventorying and the cataloging. We're going to be able to see new connections between the materials, but this is just a glimpse into all of that. There's a wonderful line. Did you design a chair in a flash? Charles was asked, and he said, yes, a 30-year flash. And here you can see the work that went into all of these pieces. Now, I knew that I wanted to be a sculptor when I grew up. And what Charles said to me was, you need to be able to use every tool as well, if not better, than the person you hire, or you won't know if they're doing a good job. And so growing up and spending time at the Eames office and seeing how they were working on prototypes, taking pictures, looking at how something could be improved upon, really helped inform my work too. And it was a great lesson that I took to heart, and I did learn how. It took me 3 years to learn how to be a bronze sculptor. So I was very grateful to get these lessons. Now, when we launched, it was very exciting last year. And one of the first things we did is have an exhibit in 3 of the windows at the Herman Miller showroom in New York City. And basically, it was a chance to take the material and share it in new ways. And it was very exciting to have these windows. It was fun to watch New Yorkers stop what they were doing to look at what was in the window. Something different was happening. And so it was a chance to pick 3 lessons that we can learn from Ray and Charles's work and share it in this way. And so in this first one, this is about problem solving, the act of finding solutions. And then this is about the molded plywood. Because Ray and Charles never wanted to make a chair once. They wanted to create a system to create a chair 100,000 times. So that meant that they had to make not just the prototypes, but they also had to make the machines that made the prototypes. And they would make about 5,000 themselves, and then they would ship it off. And if it was in production, to go to Herman Miller, who would then scale it up to 100,000. And so that's that extraordinary system of figuring out and problem solving to make that best prototype. And you can see it in the work here. What's also what we wanted to convey was, as Ray and Charles were making that molded plywood chair, it was during World War II that they heard about the story. The story was told to them by a friend of theirs who was a doctor, that as soldiers were being carried off the field, the metal vibration on the splint actually caused more damage to the wound than just the wound itself. And Ray and Charles took that idea of how they were molding the plywood and created the leg splint. So by 1943, over 100,000 were made, and it did help the war effort without hurting anybody, which is what Ray and Charles wanted to do. I also love the glow of the Eames Institute logo at night in the windows. This is the second window, which is about communication, the act of sharing, and different ways to share through their films, through their multi-screen presentations, through their graphics. And again, a lot of people know Ray and Charles's work for furniture and for chairs. It's wonderful to be able to share their exhibits, their graphics, and their architecture too, and see that how they approached the problems of chairs, they also applied to other ways of communicating ideas. Like even with Ray and Charles designing the lounge chair and ottoman, they said that was designing seating, not designing a chair. They said if you said you're designing a chair, you're eliminating the ottoman before you've even thought of it. You may solve a spatial problem out of a love for dance, but you didn't love dance in order to solve the problem. And so I just feel like this just brings so many areas of Ray and Charles's life just in this one window. Griffith Park, mathematical world of numbers, the lounge chair and furniture. That bouquet becomes part of the Herman Miller stock certificate. And then this was the third window, which is about the aluminum group and about finding more solutions to the problem and iterating on the idea. And you can see those very wood antlers I was referring to in the window there. So it's really exciting to have an opportunity, and I'm very grateful to do this with Herman Miller showroom in New York, because it allows us to just iterate ourselves on how we can share this collection both digitally and physically. And it was a wonderful response. And then also, but it's interesting how seemingly whimsical things find a use eventually. This is also, we took the exhibit inside with some of the smaller pieces from the collection and juxtapose them in ways that people could see maybe the proposal for the National Aquarium, that Herman Miller stock certificate, some of the toys they made from the pieces they collected. And it was wonderful to watch people, guests, pore over them. Those are penny toys. An article was in the St. Louis Dispatch when Charles came back from Mexico with his paintings and had an exhibit. The team at Herman Miller in New York, that was so great. Eventually everything connects. People, ideas, objects, the quality of the connections is the key to the quality per se. Now, I know so many of us are familiar maybe with this design process diagram that Charles drew in this particular version. The first circle representing what the office would want to accomplish. The second was the client, but there was the third, which was society as a whole. And you paid attention to the part that overlapped for all three. So an example would be designing a chair with Herman Miller, but it's not just designing a chair, it's designing a sustainable chair. So if someone doesn't save their Eames chair and it goes in the landfill, it's not toxic to the environment. It can be a communication gap during the Cold War with Russia and working with the US government and creating glimpses of the USA, a multi-screen presentation. Or it's an exhibit designed with IBM called Mathematica, World of Numbers. And that's where Ray and Charles really would pay attention, is to those areas that could help across all three entities. Now, here at the ranch, we wanted to take these ideas that we share indoors and apply them outdoors. And so we are considering what we're doing here now, a new case study program, agriculture as an act of design. So here at the ranch, we're going to do the intersection of agriculture, sustainability, and design. That's part of why we're doing this whole renovation project. As I mentioned before, Ray and Charles often like to open doors to ideas like conservation through the solar do nothing machine, but also they wanted to create moments of found learning at their office, in the exhibits. They said less teaching, more found learning. And part of what we wanted to create here is an experience so people can learn and see in our garden how we're composting, how we have solar panels, how we're collecting water from the rooftop, and demonstrating it. I think for the challenges that we face today, it's important to see examples of how somebody else does it. Just like Ray and Charles saying, what did Frank Lloyd Wright say? What did Mies van der Rohe say? Or what nature said? We can say, this is how we are doing it, and someone can learn from the examples that we will be having here. My mom always called this place Dry Run. It was a place to try out ideas. As Charles said, it was a 30-year flash that it took to design the chair. We've been here for 30 years, and this is what we're iterating and becoming something new with the renovation. And it's just very exciting. Just like I was saying with design with a capital D, you see the finished chair, and then we can show the process with design with a lowercase d. The same is going to be here with agriculture and growing food and what we're doing in the garden. We're going to show not just the vegetables that we will be eating and enjoying, but also how we grow them and how we are iterating each season and trying out new ideas. The sheep and the llama, that's Lulu. She does have her own Instagram account, Lulu and the sheep, are part of our system of keeping the fuel load down. They migrate across the property and in different areas on the 27 acres here and keep the grass down. Otherwise, it would be taller than 5 feet. We also shear the sheep and use the wool, which we want to do more with. We have about 30 sheep right now, but we are going to be growing the flock. And also working with our neighbors to be able to have the sheep cross over to other properties and keep the fuel load down on our neighbors' properties. We're also doing something where we're restoring the creek, which used to have steelhead trout, and working with our neighbors on that. So really taking these ideas of conservation and preservation and playing them outside. These are some things you can collect here on the property. So this is Mom's Gate, facing south, looking from the view from the living room window. I want to say the purpose of the Institute is to equip everyone with the lessons of Ray and Charles so that anyone can solve problems through design. I feel that design needs to be at the kitchen table and at the conference table. And I'm thrilled that my grandparents can be a cornerstone of seeing how to solve problems. But what I'm more interested in is also what designers are going to do today with the lessons they can learn from Ray and Charles. When we launched, Keith Yamashita sent us a letter. It was a 10-foot scroll about how excited he was. He's a brilliant designer, wonderful person. I think many of you might know him, a founder of Stone Yamashita, SY Partners today. And he was he is friends with the family. And when we launched, he was very excited and sent this letter. And I think he said something very important. For this world to now be built, what do we crave? What needs to be in our toolbox? An ability to see, not just look, to take in the world, its phenomena, its intricate systems, and to see the possibility, not just the broken. One solution leads to yet others. Everything does indeed connect. So I want to thank you all for being here and listening to my presentation, and I'm happy to answer questions. And I hope we can all design our way out to the challenges that we face today. And I hope that you'll keep in touch and visit us at eamesinstitute.org. Thank you.
Wonderful, Llisa. Thank you. There are, I don't know if you could see it, but the screen is exploding with hearts and clapping hands. And so very well received. And there was a comment earlier. Someone said, this is my inspiration dosage for the day. And so I would like to
I love it.
To second that. And so if you have any questions, please put them in chat. I did see lots of comments in chats, but any questions for Llisa? I did see one there, but Llisa, I'm going to start with a question of my own. In addition, and this is something that the group may not know, in addition to your role curating at the Eames Institute, you also spent some time at MoMA, correct? Curating work for Ludwig Mies van der Rohe. And so coincidentally, right, being MillerKnoll, we have the good fortune of having Ray and Charles Eames in our portfolio, as well as the designs of Ludwig Mies van der Rohe. Just from your experience with both, like what would you say uh, some commonalities are in from the
Oh,
two? And building on your comment earlier, Llisa, you said all things connect, right? So what
right,
maybe
right.
another way to phrase it is, what are some of the connections you see between these design legends?
Well, I think what's extraordinary. So the story that I heard that when it basically was a 6-week internship that turned into 3 years. And what it was that the MoMA in New York had Arthur Drexler back in the 60s had gone to Mies van der Rohe and said, we'd like 8 of your drawings. And he selected some, Seagram, some different pieces. And he went back the next day and to pick them up. And Mies had mixed them in with all of them. And he basically, as I heard the story, you take all of it or you get none of it. So they took all of it, but they didn't know what they had. And so I was finishing 10 years of archiving because they wanted to publish the drawings. So what was great is I was doing an inventory and it was ended up being 14,000 drawings. And it's interesting because what I loved about it and what I connected with was the iteration on the ideas of what was best for each site. It was seeing not just the finished drawings, but it must have been from meetings where they're sketching out 3x5 base systems that yes, one project may end up on one particular site, but there had been multiple sites to consider. And so this exploration and iterating and improving and constantly trying to make it the best possible for that particular situation was extraordinary. And what I realized was also that I love that the MoMA was trying to publish the drawings to make them available. That was a way you could do it, not just show a few pieces in an exhibit. So again, that was part of what I love to apply what we're doing today is how to make this available and share to learn from it. But I love that it was sort of unfinished and it was things in process, was seeing that at MoMA.
Super, super. So here's a question from the Q&A. Could you talk a little bit more about the numbers grid and the red line that was on the slide with the kites in the
Yes.
Herman Miller window?
Oh, somebody's picked one of my favorite pieces.
Okay.
So that's the Night's Walk. And so that's an example of Ray and Charles were making a large graphic that then would get photographed and be on the image wall. And this particular one is in Mathematica, A World of Numbers and Beyond. There is one at the Henry Ford, there's one at the Museum of Science in Boston, and there's one in New York. What that is expressing, it's actually called also a magical square. If you look at it, both the columns and the rows, each one adds up to 260, which makes it magical. But what the Knight's Walk is doing is actually showing that if the knight could start on a chessboard in the upper left-hand corner, it can move across the board without touching the same spot twice. And so what's interesting is it's not a symmetrical red line, but it's just the walk that the knight would take.
Wonderful. Another question. When is the ranch or the institute going to be open
So
for
this
visits?
renovation here is going to be probably about a 2-year process. But as I may have mentioned, I mean, when we started this archiving process, I thought it was about 20,000 objects. I think it's going to be 50,000 objects when we're done. And so the ranch, it's too big for the collection to house it and to take care of it and everything. It's We need to do that elsewhere. So what we're first doing is taking care of the ranch and just making it more accessible across when you enter the spaces, but it's always going to be smaller. We are going to later create a space somewhere here in the Bay Area where we could host school buses of children, all ages coming and looking at the work and sharing the legacy in different ways. For now, that's why we're focused on the online exhibits. Like I love the first one, which was before they were the Eameses. There's one about the aluminum group. And so I'm looking forward to sharing. This is always going to be where I am right now. It's going to be about the land and the agriculture and how we can do more with less is how I put it. And
Wonderful.
that will be hopefully open to the public. What we're encouraging is to follow us on eamesinstitute.org because that's where we're going to be sharing the news as things start to unfold for us.
Yeah, yeah. Well, your comment about the agriculture was a perfect segue to our next question, which is, in your work on agriculture and sustainability, how do you use Charles and Ray actively in your daily work?
I use them because I think for me, it's I think about now, I'm looking at the exhibits they did like for IBM, the philosophical gardens. I look at the photography that we have in the collection of plants and learning because they would say evolution or innovate is the last result, let evolution of the idea. So what I'm doing is they found inspiration in nature, and I'm looking at how we can share that inspiration in nature in the exhibits or that we do. I mean, think about it. Mother Nature is the OG of designers. And I love how it inspired Ray and Charles to iterate, to evolve an idea. And that's what we're going to show here. We're applying that to the very work that we're doing here at the ranch and how we're figuring out how to bring fuel loads down and such.
Yeah. And Lisa, we have two questions here that I think may be related. So I'll give them both to you. And
Okay.
so the first one is,
Okay.
I noticed a Noguchi table in a living room photo. What other contemporary designers did Charles and Ray procure or like? The next question, which I think is similar or in a similar vein, let me scroll down. Um, Now I can't find it. So why don't you take that first
Okay.
question about the
Well,
Noguchi piece and other contemporaries they liked?
oh, I mean, I think there were many. Noguchi, I also think of when they had the tea ceremony at the Eames house. They had a close connection there. I think of Nelson and Gerard. You'd see some pieces even in my mother's home that she inherited. Um, there were many contemporaries. I think what I find interesting is like it's also often in the photographs that things evolved and changed as people moved around. But those are just a few that I can think off at the top of my
Yeah,
head.
yeah. Okay, I found the next question, which, and, it's interesting you mentioned George Nelson or Alexander Gerard, Noguchi, all uh, who were designing for Herman Miller, right? But then this
Mhm.
other one is, do you remember their relationship with Saarinen or Bertoia? Um,
Oh, definitely.
I'm thinking back to Cranbrook, right?
Right, definitely. There's a strong relationship. I mean, particularly with the Saarinen family. I remember Amy at the last month's conversation. She
Yep.
shared. I mean, I do remember Mom telling stories about that. Arrow Saarinen had a very. They were best friends, Charles and Arrow. Arrow just passed away way too soon, but he would call in the middle of the night, as Charles would call Arrow in the middle of the night, to stake out their ideas of what of something. So when you heard a phone call ring in the middle of the night, it wasn't like there was a fire or a disaster. It was more a communication that each one couldn't wait to share with the other something that they thought of. And so it was just a wonderful. My mom just remembered that very fondly. Um, if that answers that. But yes, with the Saarinen family and the Girards, I mean, they had many close connections. Um, and yes, you're right. A lot stemming from Cranbrook.
Yeah, yeah. So another question for you. You referenced a lot of the objects in the collection, and this is everything from the chalk to the scale people to the toy house. So very, object focused. And there were also a lot of hand drawings, the paper dolls, the birthday cards, right? And
Right.
this is a very tactile collection, right? In
Yes.
today's like 21st century world, very digitally focused. What are
That's what I love about it, though,
Yeah,
Alan. In
yeah.
this digital world, this is why people go get so excited to see like it is so tactile. You want to pick it up, you want to look at it more closely, and it's very inspirational for. I mean, many guests have walked away going, "I need to think about what I'm saving," because with digital, the worry is like it gets lost. I don't know. It doesn't have that sense, and I think because I think of. Sorry, I interrupted you, Alan, but
No,
I want to just
no, go
finish this
for
thought.
it.
But with Ray and Charles, if you think about their work, everything is participatory. You go to an exhibit to learn something, you sit in a chair, you watch a film. And so to me, we are carrying that thread into the collection that it is so tactile. And so how can it be shared in different ways? But I love that it's almost that it's more than an object. It's also something that I think was important to my mother, which was she felt it was important to keep all this material connected and collected in one place. At first, you don't see why do they have this or why to have that. It's almost like the orders of magnitude, powers of 10 expand, because then you start to see, oh, this actually does have a connection from Moscow to, something that they're working on for National Aquarium. And so I call it the degrees of separation. That Kevin Bacon game, like how many degrees of like to each movie. I feel like sometimes my challenge is how many degrees does it take to get from that object to this over here?
Exactly. Well, how do you think if Charles and Ray were young designers today in a digital age, right? Would you speculate on how they might approach design differently?
Oh, Alan, you asked that so nicely because I never want to speak for Ray and Charles, but I do think about that.
Well,
I think
speculation, right?
Yeah, speculation is a great way to put it. When I was growing up, it was actually more about exhibitions and learning and education and sharing ideas, not quite as much about the furniture. The furniture was quite well in production for some of those, although they were always, checking in on things. So for me, I would love to see what educational websites they would design. I think they were always looking for similarities between cultures than differences. And I think I wonder what that would look like. And I always think it might be a hybrid, maybe, where it's in-person exhibits, but then also realizing there's a farther reach when you can do things digitally. So I think it's going to be, I think it would be both, but I also think it would be a lot about education. But I want you to know, when I say education with Ray and Charles, I'm saying the version of found learning as opposed to less teaching. Ray and Charles never felt that you could show everything on a subject. You could show maybe 6 or 8 things, maybe, and then get that person excited enough to learn more. And that's what I feel like we're doing at the Institute. We can't show it all, but through these objects, we can share lessons that we can learn from them. And hopefully that encourages somebody to want to learn more on their own.
Absolutely. Well, Llisa, there are rows and rows of kudos in the chat. I think that, I mentioned earlier that there was a comment about this is my inspiration for the day. Somebody else said inspiration for life. So I think that's such a nice compliment. So, Llisa, thanks for joining.
Thank you.
The
I just want to thank
Design
everybody.
Perspectives. This was a real treat.
Yes, and I just want to thank everyone for writing the comments. I see many familiar names. Thank you so much for coming to this. And also, please look at the legacy. It's a legacy about looking forward, not back. And I hope you'll join us at eamesinstitute.org. Thank you so much, Alan, Evelyn,
Perfect.
everyone for setting this up.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone. We'll see you
Thank
next
you.
month. Bye.
Okay, bye.